Welcome, everybody, to another More Than Walking video podcast discussion where we seek to encourage and bring about awareness on a variety of topics. And tonight is definitely a very heartfelt topic in the grand scheme of things because of what's happening currently in Eastern Europe as it pertains to Ukraine. And before we get into the actual questions, I just want to take the time out for everybody to just introduce themselves. Just tell everyone your name, where you're coming from, and if you could go on your dream vacation, where would that be? How about you, Alexia?
Well, I was just going to say, I'm Alexia Bookums, and I'm a T9 complete injury. I live in Connecticut, and I was injured 27 years ago. And I was having a great life. I decided if I couldn't walk, I could at least roll in marathons. So I rolled the Hartford Marathon 9 times and the New York Marathon 6 times. But I ripped the rotator cuff muscle off my right arm. So I'm basically a one-arm paraplegic now. Makes it a lot harder to get around and do things and a lot more painful. But I can still talk and eat and sleep and do other things. So I'm still pretty functional.
Awesome. Where would your dream vacation be?
To go to New Zealand some more. I've got family I don't see much there. So
how about you, John?
Hey, I'm Jonathan Sigworth. I'm a C7 complete quadriplegic from Connecticut. 16 years since I fell off a cliff in India. And my dream vacation, Norway or Sweden or Iceland, somewhere where we could see the northern lights and fjords. I've never seen fjords.
Nice.
And it's something my wife Jessica really wants to see. And I know that would be a dream come true for her, which would then be a dream come true for me.
How about yourself, Jason?
My name's Jason Thurston. I'm a C6 quadriplegic from a diving accident in 2004. So I'm coming up on my 18th year. I'm almost an adult now. And I live in Bloomingdale, New York, which is way up in the northeast corner in Adirondack Park. My dream vacation would be Australia. I'd love to go to Australia.
How about the Sigworths we have in the building? Introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Vicki Sigworth. My husband's over there. He's exhausted. I'm supposedly able-bodied, but I just got trained as a recovery support specialist for to come alongside people with mental health disabilities. And I guess we have some relationship to this young man here in the lower left. My dream vacation would be either Nepal or Australia, New Zealand.
Well, I'm Corey. I'm a C4, C5 quadriplegic. I was injured June 12, 2005. So I'm approaching my 17th anniversary. And I'm not quite in adulthood as far as paralysis concerned, but I'm getting close to it. And I was injured in a diving accident as well. For me, my dream vacation is to go to Japan.
Hey, you guys, I'm Sandy. I'm from South Florida. I got into a car accident back in 2015. So this year will make me 7 years paralyzed from the shoulders down, C4, C5 area. My dream vacation would probably be, I've been trying to go on like an Alaskan cruise. I also want to go to Egypt / Israel. I really want to see the pyramids.
That sounds pretty cool and whatnot. And I hope all of us at some point in time be able to go on these different type of vacations and different type of adventures. You know what I mean? There's no need to be limited by our personal disabilities or what have you, but being able to travel is highly important and it's key. You know, as we speak about vacation and being free to roam, we obviously know what's going on in the news, and it's just dominating all of these different news outlets, and it's the issues in Ukraine. And as we get to that, it's difficult to understand or put ourselves in a person's shoes who are experiencing war firsthand. And how will we react to those things? We can all experiment with hypotheticals, which we'll do a little bit later, but the key takeaway is that there are people out there who are risking life and limb to be able to feel a sense of liberation. And so today's subject is give me liberty or give me death. And if you're not familiar with that phrase, or if you're not familiar where that comes from a man named Patrick Henry when he addressed the Second Virginia Congress in 1775. He spoke very vigorously about the oppression that they were facing from the British monarchy. And we know about things like the Boston Tea Party. We know about the Revolutionary War and subsequently what led to this nation's independence. But analyzing his speech is, I think, key, because there are a lot of things that he spoke about when it comes down to when you're dealing with tyranny, when you're facing war. What are you willing to put on the line in order to feel free? And I know oftentimes we in the disability community don't feel free, and there are some things that even we have to try to figure out to make us feel more liberated and feel more like we're not so confined, while at the same token realizing that there are people out there that are experiencing situations that are far worse than maybe even paralysis has brought on. And so it's going to bring us to our first question. There's an all too familiar proverb that says, all fair in love and war. All is fair in love and war. Both spectrums have a lot of unpleasantries. And if we're being honest, life isn't fair, no matter what circumstances you're going through. Love can leave a person heartbroken if not reciprocated, and war can make the victor feel empowered. With 1 billion people worldwide living with a disability, the injury itself already feels unfair, and coupled with an act of war can make one feel even more debilitated. So the direction that I was thinking about in here is that we know that all is fair in love and war really pertains to like anything goes. But sometimes the people who are not on the receiving end may feel that's fair. That's okay, because it's a by any means necessary type of attitude in order to resolve their own issues. And President Putin, for him, he felt like there was a red line that he didn't want being crossed with the expansion of NATO, and even with Ukraine wanting to join the EU. And for him, that might have been, for him, his mindset could say, that's fair for me to then do what I'm doing by invading Ukraine because I don't want this happening. And so that's his perspective on dealing with conflict resolution. But I want to know your guys' perspective on handling conflict resolution when you're dealing with your own quote unquote war or battle within yourself or just in life in general. And Jason, I would love for you to take that first question, please.
Sure. All's fair in love and war. I've definitely been down the road of a relationship where I depended on the other person to help me as a home health aide, and having to deal with that, being nice to somebody so that you can get what you need out of them, even if you're fighting or things like that. And it causes us sometimes when we're in conflict like that to be more humble and more willing to compromise. But the war, all fair in war, is a whole nother thing. When you're talking about conflict resolution, personal battles being what they are, I always say that my personal battles I've had before my injury just as much as now, and that's being a procrastinator and having trouble coming through without a deadline. So the conflict there is to try and be more proactive.
I like what you said about the love aspect, having to love or even show love when you are codependent on somebody. Did that feel fair to have to maybe deal, I don't know if you did, have to deal with any maltreatment by the person that you're codependent on?
Being stuck in bed, not being able to go anywhere, and having to listen to whatever's being told to you and not being able to leave the room or react to it. Yeah, that's not fair. But what I found was when I eventually found a way out, when I found somebody else to help me, I got my due back and kicked her out. So that wasn't fair to her in her eyes. That was, the conflict going on there.
And I think that speaks to, as I was saying before, like somebody that feels like the victor in a particular situation may feel like that's okay, because they're reaching their resolution quicker than the other person. I know that I've seen it where there have been conflict where the caregiver is like, well, you're asking too much of me. And it's like, how can you say I'm asking too much when this is your particular job that you're assigned to do, you're getting paid for to do? And then it becomes like, a bit of a war of attrition. You're combating over something that should be easily able to be resolved. And in a lot of cases, it just doesn't seem like all conflict can be resolved fairly. How about you, Alexia? How do you deal with conflict and resolution?
I'm terrible. I give in too easily to everything. It's probably the best I can say. I let other people take over and do things, or I do things. I'm a people pleaser.
Would you say that's something that has been brought on due to the experiences because of the injury?
No, I think I was always that way. I don't think that the injury has changed the way I am very much. I've always been a people pleaser. I've always felt like I can do anything. I could do anything. I'm capable of doing anything I want, but I don't like to get other people upset with what I'm doing.
It sounds like, you have a good-natured heart in terms of the way that you want to be able to approach. But then there's also a portion that can be unfair to you as well. If your object is just to be able to say, okay, in order to resolve it, like I could just kind of go along with the flow, but then you'll be lacking. And sometimes, when people are facing whatever battle they are, and this is not to draw like any false equivalence or anything, but, a person could be suffering from cancer or, like many of us with disabilities, but we feel like, man, I'm such a burden and whatnot. It's a fight that we're all enduring. It's a fight that we're all experiencing, and no one should feel more or less of a burden if the object is to resolve. So I think about the people in Ukraine that are hunkering down in a bomb shelter and whatnot. That person, these small little inconveniences that somebody may have to endure for however amount the time may be, that's a part of the beginning of resolution, and sometimes bearing each other's burdens and whatnot. So I understand as far as like being a people pleaser, but at the same token, people have to learn how to help others. Would you say that's a fair assessment?
I would. I almost want to help others too much and don't want to ask for help myself. I've been very bad about asking for help. I've damaged my shoulder so much because I've insisted on doing things myself rather than getting help.
Wow.
In the long run, that's going to really hurt me. And I remember when I was first injured in 1996, people talking about shoulder injuries and how bad shoulders can be. And I said, if exercise is good, more is better, right? And I overdid it.
I think we all fall into that a little bit. Hi, I'm Sandy. When I first became paralyzed, I think my ego got the best of me in a lot of my relationships. Learning to humble myself was one of the greatest things that I needed to do in my paralysis. I had to take a balance between what I was willing to accept from people, because people are going to be people. They will hurt you. They will disappoint you in some kind of way. So you have to be willing to not only compromise and meet people halfway, but you have to stand up for yourself to a certain aspect so that you won't continue to be abused, because people will step all over you if you allow them to. People will hurt you if you give them the platform to do so. We're naturally really good at being mean to each other. However, the moment that you stand up for yourself and you say, I'm not going to allow you to bully me, I'm not going to allow you, because you're doing so much of this for me physically, or whatever you're interdependent on that person for them to manipulate you or blackmail you for it, you have to constantly have certain types of boundaries for yourself and the other people that you have in your life. Some of the ways that I cope with my conflicts is prayer and meditation, and learning to just learn from my mistakes, try not to make the same mistakes over and over again. I also seek out help from people, like-minded people like you guys, to continuously try to find, progress in every situation. You can't dwell on the things that you can't control. You can't control that we got into, some type of life-altering circumstances that hinder us physically, but we can still speak for ourselves. So that's a great factor. Some people can't even speak for themselves. So you have to say no sometimes and say, you know what? I appreciate the services that you're willing to offer me, but I will not allow you to, demean me. I will not allow you to talk to me in a certain specific way.
Is in saying that, is standing up for yourself in a moment worth what you could possibly lose if you're codependent on that help?
Yes, most definitely. I've always put myself before other people. And if somebody is taking away from you emotionally, mentally, and exhausting you on so many levels, and you're, vibrating on a very low frequency, it's going to be hard to retaliate regardless of the things that they're helping you with. Yes, you're wiping my butt. Yes, you're helping me eat. Yes, you're doing these physical things, but if you're emotionally abusing me, you're verbally being destructive to my energy, it's going to be hard for me to rise above from other difficulties in my life. When you can clearly talk to people, tell them what you want, compromise, there's ways to get around it. There's doctors, there's therapy, there's all different ways to resolve things that sometimes we make our own lives complicated for no good reason, because of the things that we can't overcome when it comes to communication.
And to that point, it's the small things can build up to big things, right? Like if you wait too long to stand up for yourself, all of a sudden the situation becomes less manageable, more difficult, more costly to get out of.
It may take time, but you have to be willing to put in the effort. Like my son, every time we find ourselves in a block where we don't know how to talk to each other, we find our happy places. And then when we're both in a good feeling, we come and we say, this is how I feel, this is what's been going on, and this is how I feel like we should resolve it. We try to meet halfway, and as much as we can, we let all the things that we can't control in the past and keep it moving.
Well, I think that I used to allow people to take advantage of me all the time. And John knows this. And last fall, I read Oprah Winfrey's book, What Happened to You? And I realized that there's some stuff that happened to me in my childhood that made me vulnerable to be a people pleaser and to seek to gain others' recognition for doing things for people. And I realized eventually that, in reading the book and really thinking and praying about it a lot, I realized, wow, I need to receive some healing for this, which I did. And then I realized that to love somebody else is not to do what they want. But, what's going to be loving to ourselves is also going to be loving to the other person.
You speak to a bigger point. I like how, Jason and both you talked about almost like diving into your past, understanding why am I even allowing these things to happen to myself. And I think when we try to understand about um, the counting the cost of being liberated versus paying the ultimate cost for that liberation or laying down, it's why have I even allowed these things to occur to me in the first? And when I can discover that, I can better face whatever the opposition is that I'm being confronted with. And I think that's important. We all are familiar with the proverb that speaks about if you don't essentially recall your past, you're doomed to repeat it if you forget, you forget your history. So we got to know where we came from in order to know where we're going to. And I like Sandy, your point, and we know, you're tenacious. That's what your platform speaks about, is having tenacity despite, others may looking at you as being disadvantaged. And you're right, people will take advantage of the love and the compassion that you that you give to somebody, and we have to make sure that we're separating the two. I know for me, dealing with conflict and resolution, I try to approach it with like fierce optimism. So I was listening to CNN last night, and it was talking about the people who refuse to leave Ukraine. And what I noticed that most of the people who refuse to leave are the elderly. And it's not because they can't necessarily move or go on their own. They're not leaving because they're like, listen, why should I give into this? This is my home. Even though some of them are in their 80s, they're like, no, this is my home. I see this through. I think this can be dealt with. I think our soldiers can stand the test of time, and they're unafraid, they're unabashed, and I love that optimism. Somebody that's 84 may feel like, what, I need to go. And oftentimes when you see people on the trains and whatnot, they're fleeing. A lot of those are young people, and rightly so. War is scary. Just being a vet myself and having gone on deployment twice, like it's nerve-wracking, definitely, for sure. But there are people who approach it with a different level of optimism, and I think fierce optimism, knowing that, listen, the outcome may be better than what I may be experiencing right now. And I think that's a definite point that I take away from everyone. But since Russia's invasion of Ukraine, millions have been forced to flee into neighboring countries, leaving behind their homes, their jobs, and even being separated from family. Some have chosen to stay in order to render aid to those in need and to defend their country. Sacrificing one's life is the ultimate display of selflessness. What are you willing to part with for the sake of others? And being disabled, and even though some people on the call you're not disabled necessarily, do you feel you have lost too much already to give anymore? And Sandy, you can have at that.
I think there's so much that we have to continuously give. Sometimes we don't feel like we can give anymore. Like, I went through a season where I just felt like I was done with everyone, couldn't talk, about what happened to me anymore. I just was done giving my smiley faces to everybody when things weren't so happy all the time. I give up my pride on a regular basis to humble myself in order to cater to people who want to learn, to care for me. Because when you meet new people, you have to bring yourself all the way down and be reminded not everybody knows your struggle, and everybody has their own struggles to deal with. So I have to, bring myself all the way down and try to put myself in other people's shoes sometimes when it comes to the struggles of the world.
Now, in that humility, is there anything that you're willing to part with, though, for the sake of progressing and whatnot? Like, as we talk about liberty and death, what are you willing to part with anything that you may hold as like a prized possession in order to
Physical thing or like, I don't know.
anything physically, spiritually, the comfort, different levels of comfort and whatnot, in order for an overall objective to be obtained.
I think wisdom and knowledge is one of the greatest things that we can offer to each other in this world.
That's real. What would you say, Jonathan? Like, what is something that you can see yourself giving up, or maybe you already have done something where it's gotten you to the place of saying somebody else could benefit from me parting ways with this?
Well, I think there's so much that we can give up until there's nothing left, right? We could go all the way and die for someone else, and people are doing that, and so I don't feel like I've given up that much, to be honest. But I think what I have is mostly been time and perhaps privacy. Making demo videos on how I do my bowel program.
I think that's
putting that on YouTube, how I get dressed, like those things that most people don't go out and broadcast that information. There's some things that I won't share.
But I think that's a sense of servitude still, though. When you offer people an insight on how to do certain things that they may not be able to do, that's showing them how to fish and not giving them the fish. Let me show you how I help myself so that you can help yourself as well. If you're in a moment of, not wanting to ask people for help and not wanting to go reach out to the person directly, you freely give that information available so that people like-minded and like situations can benefit from those types of things. That's a great thing to sacrifice. Your time, your energy, your knowledge, and your privacy, basically, because you expose yourself to a certain extent. You're vulnerable in front of people.
Yeah, thanks, Sandy. I mean, I think that's true, and that's why, through More Than Walking, I'm really trying to make it easy for more people to give away their dignity and their time and their experience. And to that point, like, being disabled, do you feel like you've lost too much already to give anymore? I feel like it's the opposite. The more experiences, the more challenges we have, the more we have to give, the more wisdom, as Sandy was saying. And I've been to so many doctor's appointments with my mom since the time I've been injured, where just a simple conversation, not going straight from the office to the car to back home, but stopping to get interrupted and can really change someone's life. And just being open to share about your personal struggle can be so transformative.
Whatever you do that's liberating, do you do it for the sake of the reward that may possibly come?
My reward is seeing someone else benefit from me sharing my information, or listening. Listening goes a long ways. When I was a independent living specialist at the Independent Living Center, being able to sit with somebody who was either newly injured or was going through a lot of the same things that I've been through, and just to listen to them and share that's the reward in itself to me. As far as not being able to give any more, I think that the more we give, the more you get that back tenfold, kind of. The more we work together and look out for each other and help each other out, the stronger we are.
I agree. How about you, Alexia?
I agree as well. It's you learn by having people help you and you helping other people. It goes both ways.
Do you think now, like as it pertains to Ukraine, is there a time limit? Vicki, maybe you can answer this. Is there a time limit for which we give? If we haven't given enough, is there a time limit for which we have to be able to say, I've given enough in order to lend support. Because I think about it like this, and I don't mean to like bounce too far back and forth, but to some degree, everybody calls out Russia and says Ukraine needs this and they need aid and support. But then there's a fear of how much you give because you don't want to incite something worse happening, if that makes sense. So it's like people don't want to say it's genocide, yet there are millions of, tens of thousands of people dying, and yet it's quite obviously that they need the support. Is there a time in which we say, and I'm not just talking about America, but like just in general, when we're giving out something, that you have to have a cutoff date or a cutoff time?
I think so, because how about your own lifeline? You want to die for people to a certain extent until your own life is in. I always say you can only help others as much as you can help yourself. You can only share how much you've been sharing for yourself. I'm not saying we're in the same position as Ukraine.
Right.
I know America is able and willing to assist, but we have so much issues in our own backyard that are dire. We're ignoring a whole bunch of things in our own backyard, from human trafficking to homelessness in America that's predominantly targeted in a certain area of minorities. It's not, I know it's not bombs over your city kind of stuff, but we're going on shortages on food, shortages on caregivers. Hospitals are still broken. The broken systems over here need a lot of focus, and we haven't been focusing. We're scatterbrained all over the world. When I'm not saying we can't help our brothers and sisters, but our backyard is not too clean.
How about you, Vicki? Do you see it as, at times you need limits on how much energy you expend?
Oh, definitely. My desire is to follow Christ, and he says, I only do what I see the Father doing. And so I used to be motivated by all the need I see. Okay. And just before this call, I was on a public health committee meeting talking about mental health in Connecticut and how poorly funded it's been and how the funding has been taken away for the past 10 years. And it's just been, and COVID has now increased the problems with mental health care. And still the legislator doesn't seem to want to do much about it. How do we respond to this need in our backyard, as Sandy was saying? And if I try to solve everybody's problem, I'm going to be totally burnt out. So that's why I have to, okay, God, what am I supposed to be doing? What am I not supposed to do? What am I going to trust you to do? And there are times when, and I used to think that I had to help a couple of people all the time. They would always call me for help. And when I realized that my doing that wasn't helpful to them, wasn't truly helpful. It was helpful in the short run, but it was teaching them codependency, and so this is delicate balance of really seeking, for me anyway, seeking the Lord and say, okay, how do you want to use my skills and my resources? We can't solve all the problems of the world. America's had this God complex for too long, right?
Yeah, and that's very true. I think, as Alexia shared earlier about this desire to please people, I think things can come from a genuine place, but we have to set limits on our giving, but understanding that the giving is from the heart. And I think that's something that nobody can necessarily call into question when you're rendering aid to wherever you go. Sometimes people get frustrated when you cut something off and that pipeline is shut off, and it's not because you don't want to give any more to them, but you don't want to be tapped out where you may be needed to be used in another area. And because all of our roles aren't static, you know what I mean? Like, you may be in one area at one place, but then you need to be moved to do something else and what have you. But you have to have the strength to be able to carry on in that capacity. as well, so that others' needs can be met, because all needs are going to be different no matter where you go.
But I think there's another piece to this, which is sometimes the web of needs and is not as simple as it looks, So, we're talking about the needs that the U.S. has versus giving aid to Ukraine, and then you look at the situation in Germany and Europe. They're paying Russia $1 billion every single day for oil and gas. They've given only $1 billion in 1 month to Ukraine for military aid. So they're paying Russia 30 times the amount of aid that they've given Ukraine, and Russia is the one committing genocide,
Right.
destroying democracy, wiping out an entire country. So here's a question: why is that necessary? What are the systems in place that make giving, more to Ukraine so costly? And what are those codependencies that we're wrapped up in that make it feel like we can't do what we feel is right without doing something else that harms us or harms our interests?
On paper, $1 billion here and $1 billion there sounds crazy the way you said it. You were giving Russia $30 billion for oil, and we can only give Ukraine $1 billion for aid. But without oil, with all these shortages everywhere, because of the functioning of the American system, because we depend so much on fossil fuels, we will suffer through inflation, through recession, and all whole stuff.
Right. And that's...
There's communities in America, you go out without electricity for 3 days. It's apocalyptic out there. There's no toilet paper, and everybody's outside wishing for life to be over.
Well, and that's why Europe hasn't shut off the oil and gas, right? Because they've been codependent on this dictatorship, growing in Russia. But that's why it's so important, right, for us to really think through, wait, why are we so dependent on oil and gas? Why are we fighting against renewable energy? Why aren't we dealing with these long-term sustainable issues that could have avoided, as we were saying before? How do we get in this situation?
I think it's because we're so distracted with other people's problems instead of learning how to renew energy in our own place, learning not to be dependent on oil, learning not to be so dependent on export, import, learning to use our own resources right here in America, which is so big and vast and readily unopened and used. We don't use half the things that we have here. We get everything from China and everywhere else just because we want to keep our position in their land so we can have some type of position of power economically when we're crashing altogether because of that dependency.
Exactly. I mean, it's a huge problem that we are so dependent. Like all the places where we get oil and gas, they are not democratic countries. These are dictatorships. These are we're going to Venezuela to get gas that we would be, stop purchasing from Russia. I mean, these are terrible options to have but to the point of it's sometimes these situations highlight the fact what needs to be changed.
There's a great movie called Ice on Fire, and it talks about the very wonderful innovations that could actually shift the whole climate change issue. And I think it's extremely ironic that Putin's oil and gas and yada, yada, yada is highlighting this whole dependency. And my hope and prayer is that through this war in Ukraine, that the world would indeed wake up to precisely this problem, that we are so dependent. I think we have to really, really rethink the way the whole world is structured so that we can be there for each other when somebody's doing something stupid like Putin.
I know a lot of these things are not easy fixes, but I really feel like if America would hone in on all the resources that we have, that other people depend on, especially safety, if we hone in on that and bring it back home, I really feel like we would get more respect from everybody else in order for us to work harmony with. When the leverage is in the court of someone who literally wants to be God of everybody, those dictators out there, it's really easy when they already have their pockets in America's pocket, because we depend so much on the economic system, which is supposed to be democracy, but it's more of a, I don't know, it feels more capitalistic than anything.
So we're getting at a really deep rooted issue, and is basically at the core of what we're all talking about. How do we get to this place of why we're becoming we're codependent or dependent on foreign oil? Why can't we give enough assistance if we're delving enough, we're divulging enough money over here, but we're not dealing with these funds over here? And it boils down to a simple word: hypocrisy. And it leads us to question 3. And I'll give you guys a little backdrop to part of his speech. Patrick Henry's rhetoric was fiery, inspiring, and persuasive, but it comes with a bit of a caveat. He also owned slaves, 67 to be specifically, which speaks to a deeper issue on the subject of liberty and one's truth, and that is developing the skill and discipline to find our own hypocrisy in our pursuit of liberation. So with Patrick Henry, if you guys ever have the chance to, you can go on Wikipedia, and a guy he recites his speech of "Give me liberty and give me death." And throughout the entire time, he talks about tyranny and slavery. Shall we be forced and subjected to these institutions because of what Britain was doing to them? And one of the key points he talks about, he says, I have no other lamp to be guided by but by the lamp of experience. So in other words, basically, we've been experiencing for the last 10 years, according to him, tyranny, high taxation. There's no representation for them. You have this foreign entity dictating what we do here in the colonies. And he was bugging out about that. He's frustrated about it. But in his time period, he could not have imagined taking care of all his properties and all his lands, though he did not like the institution of slavery. He saw the necessity for slaves. And this is part of our issue, why we depend on other places, because we have a particular interest in those areas of the world. So if we police those areas, offer up the protection to be able to deploy our troops in the right areas, then we can secure the things that we need in that region. So my question to all of you guys is, and just even going back to Patrick Henry before I ask the question, if he's guided by the lamp of experience, he could have never saw, he never saw that the Civil War would eventually occur, due to the fact that the thing that you want to escape from is the same thing that you're still enforcing. But what effect does political hypocrisy and our own short-sightedness have on people? And how has someone's like a politician, how has their political hypocrisy affected you personally?
Well, I just want to say that I have thought long and hard about the fact that if we had not had the Revolutionary War, our slaves would have been free without shedding of blood 50 years earlier. Because in all the British colonies, slavery was outlawed in 1837 or something like that?
Yeah, the importation of slaves had been outlawed.
But William Wilberforce outlawed slavery and
Slave trade.
the slave trade. And
right.
What they did in the British Isles is they basically paid the slave owners to set their people free and recompense them with government funds or private funds that had been raised, because it was a whole economic system that had to be destroyed. Okay.
Right.
Just like we're talking about now with the gas and oil and that dependency. And so it's not like you can just say, oh, well, we can't do this. We have to figure out a way to do it. Well,
Sure.
Britain, the the UK figured out how to do it. And so there were no more slaves in Jamaica, okay, for instance. But there were still slaves here for another 50 years. Why? Because we were so rebellious, because the moneyed people here in America were so blind.
And used to the establishment.
Yeah.
And like you said, when you have to break down a financial institution, this is your cash cow. This is what's bringing in income. It's keeping people wealthy and maintaining their property. It's hard to part ways with those things because people feel like that type of infrastructure will be too difficult to go without, and that's exactly what happened. Even upon Patrick Henry's deathbed, he never freed a slave, and it's a despicable thought to think about, but that's true. Even with Thomas Jefferson, he stopped the importation of slaves, but the last slave ship to come into America came in illegally past 1865. That was the Clotilda, and that happened in Alabama. So it was still being done because people still saw the profit behind it. But even in modern times, with politicians always making promises and what have you guys felt the brunt of some of those hypocritical statements? They promise something on the campaign trail, but then when you're looking forward to it because you've casted your ballot towards them, have you felt the brunt of it? Has it changed your perspective on how you deal with people, even in your own hypocrisy? How about you, Jason?
I think that things are so divided, and they always vote party lines that it almost doesn't matter. And there's such a lack of compromise that there isn't an opportunity for these ideas to make their way into actual fruition, because they're all bought and paid for. The hypocrisy of, especially when it comes to people that talk about how they're going to help the little people and not give tax breaks to the rich and so on and so on, yet the system continues to perpetuate.
When we think about, like when Vicki was talking about getting to the root of the problem, there's certain things in order for you to bring resolution to it, you need to bring it back to the very root of the issue, because it festers other stuff on top of it. When I think about the slavery system that we had to go through in America, one of the main reasons why they needed slavery was because the people here in America were not willing to do the jobs that they can get out of the slaves. And now we don't have slavery anymore. We moved on to this new system where we outsource all of these companies to other places in the world that are willing to even do child labor for the things that Americans are not willing to do. So the system is not gone. It's just we don't do it in our backyard anymore. We just pay Indians, or we pay all these Asians, or we pay other places to pick the cotton instead of bringing it here and make it competitive and make people realize what it takes to make a community and scratch each other's backs and take those homeless people and those people in jail and make them do the things that we shouldn't be paying outside of the United States to do.
Yeah, you make a valid point. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
The slaves are just overseas.
Yeah, slavery is just using the monetary system to pay other people for us not wanting to do what Americans and immigrants. They take the immigrants and put them in these storehouses in Cincinnati and all these warehouse places in America that people don't talk about, the human trafficking, and they get free help that way, or a little bit of no money that way, and even some. Anyways.
And the people in our prison systems are also slaves, because, our Connecticut license plates are made by prisoners getting like 10 cents an hour or something crazy like that.
My issue is little kids overseas and people that have families and that are not as privileged as we are here in America, that are paying are the same job here, if it was here in America, would be paying somebody's mortgage, but over there it can't barely buy them food and basic necessities.
Well, that's the thing. I think it is just going the opposite way in terms of, it's a double-edged sword that cuts both ways. On one hand, yes, it is a form of slavery. I've seen where, like, these kids in different countries are making soccer balls and what have you in these sweatshops in this closed conditions, while at the same breath, even though poverty is running rampant here in our own backyard, people aren't willing to do those type of jobs, like the landscaping jobs or the roofing jobs and what have you. You don't really find everybody jumping at the opportunity to do the manual labor. So, it is a bit of hypocrisy, because we've also grown accustomed to a certain lifestyle here in our own country. How about you, Alexia? Like, how do you see things going as it pertains to what we kind of like dish out to other countries to do, and people being able to work in America and do like the same similar jobs?
I agree. I think it's horrible that we're paying very little money for people to do hard work in other countries, and we don't take the blame for that, but we're supporting that system. And I think from a public health perspective, it's nice to worry about oil and gas, but we're really going to be in trouble when we run out of water, when we don't have potable water. And I guess you can use gas and oil we have machines to clean the water, but I think in terms of long-term human survival on this planet, we have to have water. Our bodies are 90% water. And we don't think about that very often.
Definitely a valid point. So sometimes it's like the issues that we kind of hone in on, because there's so many of them. Jonathan talked about it earlier. The web of needs in the world is very complex.
Related to that, and this has come up a few times, freedom is never free. If we're not paying the cost of freedom, putting in the work for our freedom, we're making someone else do it. And it's becoming more and more difficult to figure out who exactly is paying for our freedom. But the costs are just rising higher and higher. To Alexia's point, the cost is our future generations' survival on this planet. Is I order something from Amazon, I don't know if I'm the Uyghur Muslims who are in concentration camps are making that t-shirt I just got, or if that can of peanut butter is responsible for deforestation and global warming. It's terrifying. It reminds me that, Sandy, there are so many needs. There is so much wealth. There is so much power in our country and in other countries. There are people who are capable of making the choices to change things.
Right.
But they're not doing it because they're making so much from it. And we need to be able to use what we can, our voices, our votes, our intelligence to pick apart that web, figure out who is being bought for their vote, calling out those that corruption, because things can change.
Do you see it, John, as because you said something I thought that was key, like, it's this idea of speaking up. Sandy talked about it earlier, about speaking up for our liberties, speaking up for our rights. I listened to about a man named Vladimir Kuna Mirza, or something to that effect. I don't mean to butcher his name, but he is a political dissident in Russia, and he's an outward spoken, critic of Vladimir Putin. And he did a segment on Sarah Seidner, who's a CNN contributor, show. An hour later, he was arrested. An hour later, and now he's going to be jailed for 15 days. Now, that sounds like minor to us, like 15 days in jail, that's cool. But he's also been poisoned twice prior to this. So now being in a society where we literally can go outside, and granted, there are things that we do fear. I mean, we have the subway shooter in New York just recently, going to a grocery store or a movie theater. There's the fear of these like lone wolf attacks, fear of mass shooters. But in the level of comfort we have, is there ever a time that you think, John, that we won't be able to talk freely against political leaders?
I think not all of us are experiencing the same level of comfort as the other, for sure, you know. But I think the least that we can do is question where our comfort comes from, what makes it possible, you know. And if we can't even do that, then I think that we're doomed to, you know, just be ruled by whoever maintains it, you know. If
on the bright side, I want to believe that as humans, we are ultimate survivors and we want to thrive. We've made it through so many different type of struggles as a humanity, as a whole, as a world, from World War I through so many different disasters in the world. We're very resilient. And regardless of all the problems that are piled up, there's so much still good going on in the world. And I choose to resolve the things that I can't control through trickles of chain reactions of love.
That just relates to, you know, that fierce optimism that I was talking about earlier, and it brings us to question 4. Where tyranny is present, oppression flourishes. History is filled with political leaders and individuals seeking after power and personal gain. Many are helpless to stop them, and few are brave enough to stand up to dictatorship. How do we appreciate the liberties afforded to us, and how can we persuade people to see the importance of advocacy, even if the cause isn't their own? Alexia, I would love for you to take that.
I'm speechless. I'm not quite sure how we can do that. I find it really helpful that we have these brave discussions and talk about these things, because we'll all learn to think about things differently.
I was having such a big tantrum when I was in the hospital recently. And I was so embarrassed by my behavior. I was like, you know what? I need to stop complaining about caregivers not knowing how to take care of quadriplegics like me, because a lot of people haven't been exposed to me. I need to just go volunteer at the hospital and show these people and tell these people what to do so that I don't have to come back here and you guys don't know how to handle somebody like me, from emotional damage to physical. You guys all need to be retrained, and I'm willing to train everybody. Sometimes you just have to be willing to do something about the problems you see, even no matter how little it is.
I like what you say. In fact, just today, I spoke with a local university administrator, and I said to her, your professors, your staff don't know how to treat people with disabilities. You need to be retrained. And it's because somebody with a disability is in their school and they're being totally disrespected and not attended to properly. And I like your idea, Sandy, to retrain people.
We've had a very good program at UConn Medical School the last couple of years, initiated by the students, that they want to learn how to take care of people with disabilities, because they're not learning in their curriculum. And so they've had a group of us from the community come in and they do physical exams on us, and we tell them what's comfortable and what's not comfortable. And I think we're going to get the students to be much more aware of this.
You know what?
They initiated
it. And that type of advocacy is important, right? It has to come from those who are experienced in it, not the people who have the minds to think about others in the situation. Just go right to the source. Go to the people who are going through it firsthand. You know, one of the questions they asked me while I was on vacation, and it was just random through conversation. He said, how's your stay here at the hotel? I said, it's good, but y'all need a little bit of assistance, a little bit of help. He was just like, oh, tell me about it. I told him, what we had to do in order to make things function. And prior to that, the day before that, when I was like shipping items down, he said, do you have to do this every time you go on you travel? I said, yeah, every time. And he was like,
You come with a lot of baggage.
Oh my gosh. Literal baggage.
Literal and figurative baggage. We come with a lot of baggage.
It's a lot, and it's very costly at the same token. So we talk about the price of inflation and money going up. People wonder why these things don't work out for everybody. It's because everybody is not being thought about, right? So it's like the travel industry loses, I forgot how many billions of dollars just from disabled people not being able to travel. Not just in general, but they'll count the loss if it means disrupting the infrastructure. And I kind of think that's where Sandy's pointing to in this idea of retraining people. Vicki alluded to it. We have to shake up the status quo in order for people to feel more liberated. Again, Ukraine just wants to be a sovereign nation and wants to be respected. They want to have a democratic process free of corruption. They want to do those things. But then if there are other people that are inflicting what they believe is theirs or believing how it ought to be ran, then the progress can never be made. It's just not ideal, and it's not conducive to what the general masses want. And most people desire to be free. It's just which direction do you want to go about getting towards that? How about you, Jason? How can we appreciate these liberties that we have?
I'm thinking along the lines of advocacy and how to open people's eyes. There's a big wave of inclusive, diversity, inclusion, and equity. A lot of money being put into that, a lot of programs being put into that. But those are the people that need the guidance from the people that are affected. So to advocate and to speak up as a marginalized member of society, I think it is kind of our obligation to help them understand what it is that we need and what it would take for us to feel equal. My personal mission is to make outdoor spaces accessible. I'm on several different committees and councils here in New York State, advocating for accessible trails and accessible campgrounds and accessible beaches and things like that to help open the eyes of recreation people so that those of us that have disabilities can access these places.
One way of helping people understand those other perspectives and get the imagination for empathy is to realize how it does affect them or how it has affected them in some way. Like, when someone says, oh, I've been on crutches for a week, I know how difficult that can be, and they see me in a chair. I don't get upset because I'm like, okay, I'll take it. You can relate to a minor temporary disability. Great. I'll use that and help you understand what it feels like to have that for 16 years, or longer. And I think looking at how Ukrainian President Zelensky has gone through to every single country. He talked about the potato famine to Ireland, warning against, the grain shortage that's coming up and how starvation is going to be a real problem. To the British Parliament, he was talking about the bombs falling on British cities and how that's similar to what's happening there, and finding these historical similarities between what's happening in his own country and what has happened in our own histories. I mean, we're all in the same story. There's so much about our own personal lives, whether we're walking or in a wheelchair or not. It is possible. We just need to remember, in some cases, what has already happened, and that this has affected us.
That's a key point. This is the last question that we have, and it just goes kind of a little bit on the political side, but it's more about the right time and place. Malcolm X gave a speech entitled The Ballad of the Bullet on April 3rd, 1964. As an activist for human rights, he recognized the universal need to protect people, especially for African Americans, during a time when racial inequalities and injustices were at an all-time high. Malcolm also acknowledged the power of casting your vote, but cautioned about the government's failure to keep minorities safe, and that taking up arms may be the next course of action. When is it okay to fight fire with fire versus the extinguisher? And, Sandy, if you want to take that, that's cool.
I don't really condone fire with fire type of situation, but we always have to defend ourselves to a certain extent. So you may need to bring out the fire. Like when I think of situations that I go through in my life where I've had to put my foot down because I was getting the short end of the stick and I knew that I needed to fend for myself to a certain extent. So with the situation in Ukraine, it's horrible. Like I said, I think it's a very horrible way to handle disputes that could be handled on a piece of paper from a nod of a yes and sign this paper, you get this, you get that type of peace treaty kind of thing going on. I feel like, yes, we all get affected by this. This is the reason why we as Americans have committees and have situations where we can donate and give what we can as a society. I don't know exactly what the cure-all would be for all the things that's going on with certain situations that seem so hard to deal with. But like I said, we can only do so much before the cards fall into the right place. The older generations who do subscribe to the old way of thinking that causes us to go backwards as a society, I feel like it's slowly falling away. We may not see the progress right away, but it's happening. I feel like it's happening because people are talking about things that need to be spoken about out loud.
Jason, what do you think? Like, when is it always time to fight fire with fire? Is it better for more diplomatic means? Like, how do you see that?
Well, I think that people can only be pushed so far, and unless there's an opportunity to slow down the push, then it can reach a boiling point where there's no other choice. And I don't like to think about that because I'm a diplomatic positive thinker, but I certainly have never been in a situation where I couldn't vote because of the color of my skin. So that's a whole nother level of needing to act on something that isn't working.
And just so I'm clear, too. So the question really is pertaining to, I wanted to give a backdrop of where, like, the viewpoint on one hand can be radical to some, and then to others it can be a means of understanding. Sometimes, I was having a conversation with somebody earlier where, when it comes down to the idea of freedom and the freedom by any means, and that's what Malcolm was, speaking to in the ballad or the bullet, because of the cultural significance of what was happening during the time, much like Patrick Henry, and he invoked Patrick Henry's name in that. He said there hasn't been a revolution without bloodshed. And it's not to say that's where you're supposed to necessarily get to that point all the time. But, as Jason said, sometimes you can get pushed to a boiling point. You don't want to think that way. But, with Patrick Henry, he was looking at it like, how much more can we take in defense of one's safety? Yeah, sometimes you may literally have to take up arms, and we definitely want to not be in that position and have to do it. But in respect to Ukraine, this is a time where, your liberty it may cost you the ultimate sacrifice. And just to sum it up, I think, in conclusion, it's just give me liberty, give me death. Just don't make me have to make that type of choice.
Exactly.
We want love and we want compassion, we don't want to hate on anybody to the point of which death becomes the only option or be infraction upon. But, you know, we want to love our neighbor as we love ourselves. And I think overall, in order to be able to accomplish any of those things, we got to learn the importance of listening and realize that it may be more complicated than we're led to believe, but if we get to the heart of the matter, we could set limits on what we do when it comes down to how much we assist, but always try to assist from your heart. Situations vary, so there's not always this one size fits all. But if we value our dignity and value the other person's dignity, we can help resolve a lot of issues much quicker. And when we do that and make those sacrifices, we only lose so that others can gain. And that ultimately is the reward that we want to have, so that subsequent generations afterwards can benefit from all those people who made the ultimate sacrifices. I don't know if anybody has anything else to add, but this has been a very insightful discussion. And I'm just thankful that everybody was able to participate in it and lend their perspectives. I definitely am walking away with a renewed mindset as it pertains to this subject. Thank you guys so much.